Welcome. In today's video, I'm going to go over everything you need to do to replace the exhaust manifold in your Jeep XJ. So stay tuned. All right, so you guys are going to kind of be joining me as I'm part way disassembling all of this already, but I will go over everything that I have done. And honestly, before I've grabbed the camera and I'm showing you guys this, it took me about an hour to get this far. So if you have all of the tools and you kind of know how to take things apart underneath the hood already, you should be able to do your exhaust manifold in a day, no problems. So I'm going to show you guys everything that I've moved and taken off and everything, just so you can get to the manifold a lot quicker. So let's get into it. So I'll go step by step on everything that I've removed and moved out of the way. The first thing I did was the AC fan. I completely removed that. And then I undid the pigtail for it. Then the second thing I removed was my cowl intake. I just completely took it off altogether just to get it out of the way. Then I removed the backfeed hose for the coolant reservoir. I actually did that right before the AC fan. Then other than that, I just started unplugging wires and pigtails. Everything, all of this, I unplugged from all of the injectors, the thermostat housing, the entire throttle body, everything, and the wire that went down to your O2 sensor on the down pipe for the exhaust. If you don't have that right there, mine has two of them, but if you don't have the upper one, then you're good to go on that. Then after that, I undid the fuel line from the fuel rail. And then I just started undoing vacuum lines and everything that connects to the intake, because the exhaust manifold and the intake share bolts. So I just undid all of this, because once I undo all the bolts, the intake will come out and then the manifold. But before I did any of that, removed anything or unplugged any of the pigtails or anything like that, I took a ton of pictures. Took about half a dozen pictures with the phone, just so I knew where everything went, so I don't have any vacuum issues or any pigtails that aren't plugged back in. And that's honestly about right where we're at, other than taking off the power steering pump. I just undid the hose, then I undid the belt for the serpentine belt, and then from there I undid the 3 bolts that held on the power steering pump, and I just kind of set it to the side because I didn't want to undo any of the lines that go to the pump or the reservoir. But the pulley was contacting the radiator, so I put a rag in the way so it doesn't bend any of the fins. And then I just kind of took a coat hanger and put it on the hard line to where the hood connects right there, the hood latch. And honestly, that's right about where we're at. And a rule of thumb that I did for about 2 or 3 days before I even started this project, on every bolt that shares between, that puts on the manifold onto the block and is sharing between the intake and the manifold, I hit with PB Blaster. I hit it with PB Blaster, just soaked it for about 3 straight days, just so I wouldn't have any issues removing any of the bolts. And I know the bolts can be brittle on these. So far, mine have been good. But yeah, that's about where we're at. It's only taken me about an hour, and honestly, it's been easy. I know your results may vary, but so far, mine has been great. But I will finish removing these bolts, and if I have any tips and tricks along the way, I will let you guys know to make this easier. I also did pick up 2 new tools to do this that were recommended to me by a viewer for the channel. The first one is the 9-piece wobble socket extensions. They were about 15 bucks at Harbor Freight, so I figured, for 1/4 inch, 3/8 and 1/2 inch wobble extensions, you can't really beat that for 15 bucks, and they're all different lengths. I was suggested to use the 10-inch one for the 3/8 to remove the harder to reach bolts for the exhaust manifold. Then another tool I got, I don't know if I will even need it, but I figured, you know, the very last bolt that's closest to the firewall will be hard to get to. So I picked this one up. It's a 360-degree head on a 3/8 drive ratchet, and you can lock it, do any angle you want, or unlock it, do any angle you want, and then lock it, and it will hold it in place. And then you could switch it to go either way you want. Figured that with the extension, I should be able to reach just about any bolt I need when doing this exhaust manifold. So I already have 3 of the 7 nuts and bolts holding the intake and the manifold off. You will have a nut and a washer on the very front right there and the very back of the exhaust manifold holding it on. The back nut and washer are the hard ones, or the hard one to reach. So that's why I have the extension, the wobbly extension and everything. But one tool that has been really good is a 14mm ratcheting end wrench. It's been able to reach in there to get the bolt very, very easily. It's there's just enough clearances to reach in there and get the bolt. So if you don't have these yet, go to Harbor Freight while you're picking up the Wobble extensions and pick up a set of ratcheting end wrenches, and this will be a lifesaver to getting the bolts off that are holding it on, and then you can use the extension for the last nut and washer on the back of the manifold. All right, so I know 2 extremely common ways for these manifolds to crack and break is just getting hot, you know, the hot and cold cycle over and over and over and over, you know, however long the Jeep has been around for, which at this moment in time, the youngest Jeep is 21 years old. So it, yeah, 21 years of hot and cold cycles can cause some breakage. And the second one is bad motor mounts. The stock motor mounts are garbage, even if you buy them from, you know, AutoZone or wherever. So I suggest getting aftermarket ones like Brown Dog motor mounts, or I have motor mounts from DB Metalworks. I will have a link to them down below. They're just like pretty much every other company's motor mount that's aftermarket. But he is a local guy, so I figured I'll help out a local business to me. And yeah, I will have a link to that down below. But I have almost every nut and bolt out of this intake and manifold. So once I am completely done with it and got every nut and bolt out, I will get you guys, or if I run into any issues, I'll get you guys. So this is where we're at so far. I got the 5 bolts off the top with the 2 nuts and the 2 washers on each end. And then I realized there is 4 bolts on the bottom. Obviously, I should have realized that, but there is 4 bolts on the bottom that you can easily see through the cracks in the intake, where you could see the flanges of the exhaust manifold. So you can easily get to those, and that is why you buy those wobbly extensions. I used the 3/8 one, the longest one that there was, which is 9 inches, and I was able to easily reach those bolts. So if you haven't done this yet, it'd be good to hit those 4 bolts with PB Blaster just like you did on the top. This is what we're working with here. This intake is disgusting. So I think I'm gonna actually remove my fuel rail and my fuel injectors and my throttle body and take this down to my local car wash and get kicked out for cleaning it. So that is the plan right now. Get this thing completely clean. So I will have a clean intake. And then from there, I'll pull off the exhaust manifold, pull off the little gasket, and clean up the mating surfaces. So we will have a clean surface to put on the new manifold. And let's say you're doing this job over several days like I am. If you have to, you know, kind of call it a night, I would shove rags in all of the intake ports at least, and then put something over it to kind of, you know, keep the moisture away, like a tarp or whatnot. Because with my hood louvers, it rains and rain comes in on the motor. So I figured stuffing rags on the holes where the intake goes and then covering it in a tarp would be my best bet to keep it as clean and moisture free as possible. So there is my cracked manifold. I honestly think this is the OEM one, the original, because yeah, this thing is disgusting and it is cracked all the way around. So yeah, I'm glad that didn't you know, start separating more than it already has and just cause a, you know, even larger crack. But yeah, I'm guessing this is the stock manifold and it was due for a replacement a long time ago. All right, so this is where we're at so far. I am cleaning the mating surface of the intake up really well. I already have the block completely cleaned with brake cleaner. I got all of the gunk and all of the nasty stuff out of the intake and the block. So once I get this completely cleaned up and cleaned with brake cleaner, I will, you know, start putting the copper spray onto the gasket, let that cure and get tacky or sticky. And then from there, we'll start putting this thing back together. This is where we're at so far. I was able to get the intake and the exhaust manifolds on there, and I have the bolts nice and torqued up. I don't know the torque specs, but I just got them pretty snug, so they should not go anywhere with how much I tightened them. But I did have a suggestion from a subscriber. He said threading the bottom bolts in for the intake manifold prior to reinstalling it will help with getting things aligned. And honestly, I wish I would have seen that comment before doing it, because getting those bottom intake bolts on was pretty hard. You definitely, you got to lay underneath the Jeep. At least what I did was I laid underneath the front axle of the Jeep, and then I just reached my arm between the steering and the track bar to get up in there to be able to hand tighten or, you know, get those bolts threaded in there, to then get a socket and a wrench on there to get them torqued down. But that is a really good suggestion. I wish I would have known that before I started, but this is all done now. So I'm just gonna start putting everything back together, and if I run into any issues, I'll get you guys. If not, I will go through the process of how I put things back together where it all would go smooth. I got the fuel rail and the injectors reinstalled along with the insulation. If you have not done this yet, I will have a link to my video on the install down in the description below, and a link to the product on Amazon. This would be a perfect time to do the install if you have not done it yet and want to do it. And I also got the vacuum lines put back on along with the sensor, and taking the pictures with my phone or getting pictures of it worked out perfect, because I got confused on where the sensor went, but taking pictures of it helped me out with that. So now I'm going to get the throttle body back on and the cowl intake, and then we're going to move on to the power steering pump. So the second step of putting it back together was taking the wire harness and flopping it back over and securing it down. Then I just pretty much hooked up every pigtail to all the wires. Other than taking pictures, it made it really easy, because since it's the stock harness, a lot of the wires were already bent, like just from sitting there for years and years. So once I flopped the harness over, it pretty much lined up with the throttle body that I put back on. Then I hooked up this part of the pigtail. I got to hook up the O2 sensor pigtail. And other than that, when I put the throttle body back on, I cleaned the living crap out of it. So I made sure it was as clean as possible. Just put brake cleaner on a rag and wiped it all the way out. And then this is a good time to clean your throttle position sensor if you're having issues with that also, since it's already all taken apart. But that looked good to me. So this is where we're at so far. I'm going to finish putting on the cowl intake and buttoning up, you know, any of the stuff that includes the throttle body. Then the last thing I'll be doing is putting on the power steering pump, double checking everything, make sure it's all hooked up right and tight, and then we will test fire this thing. Well, I have everything back together now. I made sure everything was torqued and tight and everything was plugged in all the way. the last thing I did was just clean and put back together the cowl intake, and that is good to go now. So the last step is let's start it up and see how it runs. If it runs great, we'll call it a video. All right, well, since I have everything completely done, the last step is let's start it up, see how it sounds, and see if I did everything right. Perfect. Seems like everything's good to go. I'm gonna let it idle for another minute or two, make sure everything is good, nothing happens. Then from there, we're done. All right, all of that smoking is actually from the wrap that I put on my exhaust before it even connects to the manifold. I hit this with so much PB Blaster just to make sure these bolts were good that I think that's why it's smoking. But crawling underneath it and looking, that's where all the smoke is coming from. Well, we're finished with the exhaust manifold replacement. I let it idle for about 20 minutes to burn off the rest of that PB Blaster on the exhaust wrap, and after that all burned off, we had no problems after that. So honestly, don't know why I was putting this off. I should have done this a lot sooner because it is actually an extremely easy install. So you guys shouldn't have a problem with it whatsoever. But if you've gotten this far in the video, I really want to thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I'll see you in the next video, you guys. Bye.